Meryl Streep is considered by many to be quite simply our greatest living film actress. She's won 2 Oscars, a BAFTA for The French Lieutenant's Woman, 6 Golden Globes, and has just added another BAFTA nomination for her role in Doubt. She's famously perfectionist in preparing for her roles, and her work encompasses critical and box office successes now across 3 decades. Meryl Streep, welcome to Your Life in Pictures. Your first 2 big movies in terms of public perception were The Deer Hunter and Manhattan, and I wondered how you came to get those 2 parts as a sort of budding actress at the time. Were you ever a kind of unemployed waitress waiting for your big break?
I was a waitress for a lot of the time, but it was during university. I paid for my scholarship. I got a scholarship at the School of Drama at Yale, and I paid for that with waiting on tables while I was in the school and during the summers. The Deer Hunter came because Bob De Niro saw me in The Cherry Orchard, where I played Dunyasha, the maid. And I had taken as my, what's the highfalutin acting word? My endeavor, I think you call it your endeavor.
Oh, that is highfalutin.
Yeah, I was going to fall down every time I came on stage, for some reason or another, just to make myself and the other members of the cast laugh. That was my thing. And that he saw that performance, a shameless performance, and cast me in The Deer Hunter was sort of amazing. He went around and saw lots of theater that season. He saw Chris Walken, who was in, I think, Sweet Bird of Youth, and John Savage, who was in a play. And it was early in his career when he first had some clout, and he took Michael Cimino around, and they cast it from the theater actors in New York.
I think it was that falling over that stayed in his mind. You've said, in direct contrast, in fact, to what many actors claim, that all your parts are you in some shape or form, and I wondered if that's how you find the humanity in them, and if that was a particular challenge in Sophie's choice.
I think the response that you have when you first read a script is the most honest one, and the one that is sort of undeniable. So I always would say I picked things to do, reading scripts, by when and if my heart started to race at a certain moment. And that's happened more or less on different levels with most things that I've done. Certainly with Sophie's Choice, it was a part that I really, really coveted, and it was difficult to convince the director, Alan Pakula, that I was up to it. But
why did he think you might not be?
He wanted a real Eastern European girl. He wanted Orly Vollman. Just somebody foreign.
How did you convince him?
I remember those early meetings. We just talked in depth, and I read him some poetry in a voice like Sophie a little bit, and he gave me the chance,
It's interesting that you should have wanted that part so much, because in many ways it seems to embody a lot of the qualities that you've subsequently looked for in your roles, the sense that you don't really know who she is, you think you do, and then you don't, and that sort of sense of ambiguity.
Yes, it's always intrigued me about film, because we do that with characters. I do it when in a film, and I just in the first 10 minutes I've decided who everybody is. I've decided about the performances and whether they're any good, and I've decided who the character is, and my absolute favorite thing is to be convinced through the course of the film that I'm wrong, because I so rarely am. And it's just I like playing characters that you misconstrue, and because this is what we do as actors, is translate people and to each other. And the ones that are most interesting are the ones that are the most misunderstood.
You mentioned trying to convince and convincing Alan Pakula that you were right for the part, and I wondered if there was a point at which you found that you were in a position to start interviewing directors.
No, I've never done it. I've never, I don't think, been in that position, and I've certainly never exercised it. I've always, projects have come to me with the director. Even if it's a first-time director, they pick me. I feel like it's important that there be somebody in charge and that it not be me.
Are you sure?
And then from then on, I try to take over. But I do like the feeling of it being someone else's fault, you know.
Of course. And what does a good director bring and a bad director bring?
Well, the best ones are hideously over-prepared. I mean, they know the material, they know everything about their own personal connection to the story. They have one. They're very, very prepared, or if they're not, they convince you that they are. That's very important, because you must feel trust, and you must feel safe, and you must feel that you can make all the mistakes in front of her or him, and they will fix it in the editing. And because they know what the piece is. And having said that, the second component is that they're willing to expand the piece to, they take all the good ideas and the bad ideas from everybody. You feel collaborative. They incorporate them or they don't, but the door's open. And it's just a wonderful feeling.
And the bad ones bring none of those things,
The bad ones are jealous of, the bad ones are, I've had one director who said to me, I noticed you talking with the other actors when you're off the set, and when I'm not there. And I'd like it if you wouldn't do that. Because I don't like it when people are, you know, I like to be in on the thing that,
Sorry.
You know, it's just like, whoa! But
you playing Karen von Blixen in Out of Africa, and in some ways like Sophie, she's an intelligent and therefore perhaps a slightly unsympathetic woman. Do you think that the two do seem to go hand in hand often, and that's part of your challenge as an actress with the parts that you've taken?
oh, darling, that is a whole evening in itself, that conversation.
We've got all night.
Yes, intelligence is attractive in a woman to a point. And I think we all know, you know, beyond which we can't go. So it's just, we're talking about the nexus of sex appeal and smarts. It's a very interesting thing. I think this was a dilemma in her life, actually. This was a problem. How smart she was, how far she could see into the relationship and beyond and where it was going to go. How far she could see the limitations of her own jealousy and his needs to feel completely free of all commitment. It's a familiar.
This film also marks the beginning, I think, of people's fascination with your ability for accents, which always seemed a slightly misplaced fascination, as I imagine it's part of the job description.
Jeremy Irons gave me tapes of his Danish nanny. No. And I had those. And there was a film of her very late in her life when she came to the United States. She did a television program called Omnibus. And she read a short story, Baru al-Sodani or something. And it was a beautiful, she was very old and broken. I mean, at that point, I think she was just eating 3 grapes a day and champagne, which sounds like a perfectly good diet to me. But she was very ill, and she died soon after, but I listened to that. I was very lucky to have that. And she spoke in a very specific kind of patrician Danish accent.
It's one of only 2 films, really, that you've made that could be classed as classic romance. I wondered if it was a genre that you had sort of resolutely avoided because of a sense that there was a trap involved in it as an actress.
I had never evaded it. I had not been asked to do too many big romances, but there weren't too many big romances either. I mean, Out of Africa was unusual in its day for its epic sweep, and it was a very expensive film to make at that time, and people thought Sidney and his backers were crazy, but Sidney Pollack is the director. And it was anomalous in its time, and so I would have done a million Out of Africas if they'd been around, but no, it was, you know, singular. But I think one thing I notice when I see these films, and I just see how slowly they're allowed to play out the scenes. It's a really interesting thing. We're allowed to look at, we're allowed to be in the breath of the people. It's not the way we edit films now. I feel a difference.
You talked, you said that very early on you were aware of the potential for people to try and pigeonhole you, that people would be wanting to try and pigeonhole you, and how at the beginning you were the long blonde hair woman, and you could see yourself being boxed in as the sort of mournful long blonde hair woman. And I wondered how much your choice of parts had been influenced by that kind of foresight.
Well, I saw early on, because I had gone to drama school and I'd never, ever in 3 years played a realistic part. At that time, there was a prevailing theory at the school propounded by its dean, Robert Brustein: no more masterpieces. You should never revisit anything that's ever been done by anybody ever again. And certainly we'll never do Arthur Miller. You know, it was just, we all looked way down our very long noses at Arthur Miller and everything realistic, and it was just crazy. But it did prepare me to think about my body and my face as a malleable instrument, and one that could be all sorts of things. And then, of course, you get to New York, cast in a movie, The Deer Hunter. And suddenly, I was up for Kramer versus Kramer, another part like that, and then Manhattan. And suddenly I saw my entire future sort of shooting out in front of me. And it wasn't the way I thought about myself. I didn't think of myself just as this sort of modelly person with this gigantic long blonde hair and a mournful look in her eye. I thought that there was so much more, and I certainly wanted to have more fun with my career. And so I looked for opportunities, yes, to screw with how I looked, how I sounded. It was conscious, in a way, to not be pigeonholed, because I thought, ugh, I'll die. I'll die if I can't, you know, beam and throb and make a mess and all the things that are wonderful about acting.
Meryl plays Lindy Chamberlain, whose 9-week-old baby disappeared from an Australian campground in 1980. Lindy claimed a dingo had carried her baby away, but was convicted of murder. And then in 1986, the baby's coat was found close to a dingo lair, and she was exonerated. A particularly difficult part to play. How did you approach it?
Well, it was an enormous responsibility, because at the time we were shooting, Lindy's case to be exonerated was in the courts. Most of the people working on the crew felt that she was guilty. I just thought it was a brilliant script, because it was one of the earliest investigations of the way our news has now become entertainment. Back then, it's hard to put ourselves back, but then the news wasn't scored like it is. That was the very beginnings of they would cover her trial, her face would come on, and the music.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely amazing, and we were all aghast. Of course, now that's the way the news is. It's scored like a movie and edited for opinion. But then I felt very, very certain about her innocence and had long talks with her and her husband. And I felt for her because she was such a cantankerous character.
That
No
was the
one
problem,
was
wasn't it?
that
She
was the
didn't
problem.
act like a sympathetic woman.
No, if she'd just been sweeter, you know, so much would have come her way, the sympathy of a nation. And the fact that she regarded the scrutiny as an intrusion was something I sympathized with. She couldn't behave appropriately. She thought her grief was private, and she wouldn't display it for the entertainment of the evening, you know, news. And she also, you know, didn't know that her eyebrows went like this. And I thought it was so important a thing about women who's, you know, it's why everybody gets Botox now, so that everything opens up and is not threatening. But her eyebrows, she poked them. And I thought that had a lot to do with it, you know, with why she was judged so harshly. Looks count.
Well, after you made that film and headed for Hollywood for a period of time, you went to live there because your children were young and you'd been asked by one of them not to drag them around the world anymore.
Yes.
So you decided to go where the
Yes.
kind of buck was, where the work was. And that led to you making some more mainstream, different films. She-Devil, Death Becomes Her. Talk to me a bit about that period and how you enjoyed living in the epicenter of the movie world.
Well, the first film I made out there was Postcards from the Edge, which I absolutely adored. And I thought, you know, this is pretty great. It smells like jasmine every day. The sun is always shining. It's 75 every single day. And those were the reasons that I hated it after 5 years. I needed a little misery in my life, or at least the dim racial memory of misery, or at least the acknowledgement that you're allowed to be miserable, or that you could, you know, have a bad day. I don't know. I found it relentless, the sort of good weather, the good humor, the good way everybody looks good. I mean, that's me. I'm Eeyore.
The next film we're going to look at is Adaptation, which you described as, I think, as the most ambitious script you'd ever read. Perhaps that was at the time, but talk to me about that.
Well, that's Charlie Kaufman. There's always a lot for the actors to contend with, a lot of ideas, and it's always, always funny. So I think I loved Adaptation, and I loved that he took this book of Susan Orlean's and turned it into a rumination on being. I mean, he let me go wild in this motel room, you know, all by myself. And I was drawing murals on the wall, on the window, the air conditioning. And I filled the whole thing, and we were drawing. You know, we had to cut out some of this.
Just a little bit, I'm sure.
Had a wonderful time.
But in a way, you know, the fact that you came up with that scene and he inserted it in the film, it seems to me to kind of confirm this sense that, you know, that was a great story. It was a really interesting script, postmodern irony laced with it, but actually, on paper, perhaps lacking some humanity.
Well, it's great when you feel that you can add, and the actor is the one that's going to add humanity if there's going to be any.
Do you think that you look for the gaps then, or the scripts where they're filled in most? Which
I don't. I always gravitate to films that are literate and where the writing is very good, and I look at my lines and what I have to say, and I'm seduced the way a theater actress is by the text, because the text is king in my training. And then I make the movie, and I realize that the most powerful things in a movie are when she reaches back in the airplane and holds his hand, out of Africa. It's just wordless. It's the thing that is unsaid and left out. And so anyway, these are the things we discover on the set. Can't plan those.
Of course, was The Devil Wears Prada, and it's such a brilliant and sharply observed comic term. But I also wondered if perhaps it was territory that was really more alien to you than anything else you'd covered, in that it dealt with the world of, extreme high fashion. And were you worried at all when you took the part that it sort of confirmed that stereotype of the very, very nasty, successful career woman?
It was very much of a piece, the book that it was adapted from, with that stereotype, and that was sort of part of its popularity. People just love to hate certain kinds of overbearing women, and I was similarly, Kramer versus Kramer was the same kind of blockbuster hit where the wife was, without question, a bitch and vilified. And so I just set about to undermine that a little bit with what I knew about being a person with a lot of responsibility, where enormous sums of money are resting on your shoulders and how well you perform. And if you don't, everything goes south. Not only your job, but everybody else's. And I used what I knew about how difficult it is to be a woman in power, and what I've observed of friends who have made it to the top of certain businesses. And the tricky negotiation, and how really it is easier sometimes to just be mean, because it's what's expected. I've had a few women directors, and the way the crew responds to them or with the male directors is very, very, very different. And so all of that was, I thought I could deliver some of it in The Devil Wears Prada and make it a film about work. I was also reading in McEwan's book about a doctor, a person who just loves his work and just lives to work. And I have a little bit of that in me.
Your new film, The Devil Wears a Habit, it could be subtitled perhaps, but we're back to with Sister... Or God, indeed.
Wears a habit.
Sister Aloysius and Doubt. And I just wondered how successful you think generally that the transfer of plays to screen is, and because it's something that you've done a lot of both of.
You're asking the wrong person. I think it's a very successful piece of film. It's an unusual film in that it's almost like, for me it was like Van Dyke, seeing only faces and hands is just, it sort of reduces everything down to just the confrontation, visually, orally, and it's lean. And I liked that about it. It's a difficult thing, and that I don't understand how people do it, because I don't think about things that way. I think very subjectively about my character. But I think it's quite a trick for a playwright or a writer to adapt what's essentially a verbal thing into a visual medium, primarily. And so this has the best of, I think, both, and it's also one of those films where you make judgments about it early on, and then you kind of have to unravel that all at the end and think about what you just saw.
One of the wonderful things, refreshing things about this film is that you're left at the end still wondering, which, hence the title. And I wondered if it was true that you used to go about the set in between takes, saying to Philip Seymour Hoffman, "I know you did it."
No, it's not true.
Damn.
But John Patrick Shanley, what a writer he is. And he's the one who has gone around town And I'm the one who goes around cleaning up the mess, because I never did this, but he's made up this story now. It's, I'm sure I'll be following it on the internet into my dotage, you know. But no, it never happened.
I'm thinking it's unlikely you will ever have a dotage.
I'm in it right now.
You're in it, you're supposed to be in it, and it's not really happening, is it? I mean, in recent years, and particularly in the wake of Mamma Mia, you've overtaken actresses like Angelina Jolie in terms of box office draw, and it's clearly a very exciting
That's the only area.
Period for you. We're told that actresses should and do disappear at 40 and only come back to play sort of eccentric maiden aunts briefly before they die. Why do you think your career path is so different?
Yeah, that's very true. I'm always sort of consoled by the fact that Bette Davis made All About Eve, which is about a crumbling elderly actress on her way out, when she was 40. 18, 19 years younger than I am.
Are we supposed to take heart from that?
Yes, I do. I think things that, to me, that says things have changed. She did Baby Jane, or whatever happened to and Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte with Joan Crawford, these monstrous, ghoulish old hags, and they were, I think, 9 and 10 years younger than I am now. So it's that, you know, 48 was really, you were just getting the shovel ready to go in.
But has it changed, or are you just exceptional?
I think it's changing. I think I'm forging a path. I think I'm, you know, I'm out there on behalf of all the old broads, and I'm proud to be there. And and some people are happy about it, some are not. So screw them.
And I wondered what you were thinking when you said yes to this all-singing, all-dancing extravaganza.
Oh, I was thinking, I get to sing The Winner Takes It All. That's all I thought. Oh, God. Because I had taken my daughter, who was 10, and her birthday party to the theater in 2001, right after September 11th. We lived downtown. School had closed, blah, blah, blah. And everybody, the kids were all very, you know, kids. They were muffled. And I wanted something to really kick them back into gear. And so we went to this, I opened the paper and it said, unadulterated joy. And I thought, okay. I called up, I got tickets, and we went. And they all troop in. What is this? And by the end, they were standing up with all the Japanese tourists and the old ladies, and the whole place was rocking. People poured out of the theater at the end, dancing down the street. We had to go right and buy the CD. And I thought, this is a tonic for New York City. I wrote them, the cast, a letter, said, thank you. You gave us back our dancing shoes, you know, and it was, I still think about it. And so I had no compunctions for 1 second. I couldn't believe that they wanted me to be in it based on my body of work. And the rest of it, but I was thrilled, and we had the greatest time that any cast and crew has ever had.
Just finally, what do you plan to do with this newfound power, this super grossing, mega grossing, box office delivering, superwoman?
I found out this month that I have a slot. I'm sure you don't know what that is. I'm going to disabuse you of what that means. That means I have a slot in the summer when it's a good time to put out a blockbuster.
Oh,
and yes, so they call it, they called it the Devil Wears Prada slot. Mamma Mia went into it, and next year Julia is going in. So isn't that nice? I have a slot.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Meryl.
you. Thanks for doing this, Maria.
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure.